Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dose of Desi. Hope everyone's having a fantastic weekend so far. Today is the 26th of February, and believe it or not, we're already on. Hold on one second. We're already on our sixth podcast episode, and with me here is Hassan and our special guest.
Hi,
What's up?
It's good to be here.
We will definitely do an introduction and get to know our guest here. Very excited about that. We had a lot of fun with some special guests in the last few episodes. So everyone get ready. This is going to be a good one as well tonight. Before we get started as well, please feel free to share your thoughts, comments, and questions in the chat box throughout the podcast as well.
That's right. And so tonight we'll be getting to know Methi. She's someone I met during my time at Brandeis University when I was studying international development. Since then, we've both graduated or are in the process of officially graduating. And Methi currently works in the international development sector in the DC metro area. She's had a chance to work and travel abroad and has a unique perspective into what it means to be Desi American. And we could talk about what Desi means for those of you who might be listening and might not know what that means. And she's also had some opportunities and challenges that she will be sharing with us today.
And I'm very excited to get to know her as well. So without further ado, let's get started. Welcome, Methi, to the Dose of Desi.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's good to be here. And I'm excited to get my dose of Desi.
So you wanna start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself? And I mean, I know I touched on a couple of things there, but if you want to elaborate or expand on any of those, it'd be great to just hear your background.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Methi, and I am originally, I guess, from Bangalore in South India. But I grew up on the West Coast in Salem, Oregon, which is sort of the forgotten city that's an hour from Portland, which most people are familiar with. And then, I've kind of only recently moved back to the East Coast. We've talked a lot about my family's immigration story, so we can dive into that for sure. But when my parents and I first immigrated from India to the U.S., sort of to Philadelphia. So that was the first city I lived in, and then we moved to the West Coast where I grew up. But I've been fortunate enough to live in California, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and now Maryland as well. So it's been a big journey.
Yeah, and I remember one other thing that we have in common is the Peace Corps, right? You've also traveled a bit. I remember you when we were talking a little while ago. I know you mentioned Bangalore. You pronounce it properly. I can't.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying to say it as Bangalore, but I always default to Bangalore. But I'm trying to remove the colonization out of my vocabulary.
Good for you. I'm still working on that myself. But so you said that's where you were born, and then when you moved abroad with your family, you were in the Caribbean, right? Somewhere in the Caribbean?
Yeah. So
I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So my dad is a psychiatrist. So he actually, it's a funny story, but sort of by a weird accident, he ended up working in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. And my mom and I joined him when I was a baby. This was a long time ago, but we lived there for about a year or two, and then we eventually immigrated to the US. But it's kind of interesting that, when you think about Indian diaspora or Desi diaspora, people don't always have a very straight trajectory, right? Sometimes we kind of hop around to different places. So for my family, it was the Caribbean, which, as you guys probably know, has a fairly large Indian diaspora. And then And then, of course, the East Coast in the US has a big diaspora. Not so much in Oregon, but I'm sure we'll dive into that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think through my trials too, I've been, I guess, surprised to find, like just both Indian and Pakistani people abroad, and how much the Desi community immigrates, and yeah, so it's been interesting. But okay, so could you kind of take us through how you went from Bengaluru, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah.
All the way to Maryland today. Like, what was, how did you go from there to here, and what were the places that you lived in, and what were some of the, I guess, more, I get not touching, but like experiences that really shaped who you are, who you've become today, and how you got there, how you got to here.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess to understand like my family's journey, but also like why I was in Bangalore. So like to go on a tangent a little bit, my parents are from two different parts of India, which is somewhat unusual, I think. My father, his family is from like Air Force family heritage, right? So my grandpa was stationed in Bangalore, and he's like a Tamilian himself, but married a Malu lady and then had like 3 kids who were moving around all over India. So the family sort of settled in Bangalore, and that's where my dad grew up for, most of his life. And then my mom is from Northeast India in Arunachal Pradesh, and she actually
beautiful
went to,
state.
Yeah, gorgeous, like
Yeah.
Himalayas, but like very, very different than South India for sure.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. You were in the middle
No,
of
no,
a
you're
thought.
fine. So she went to dental school in Bangalore, and my dad's medical college was like really close, so that's how they met. So that's why we were in Bangalore. But like, I feel like my heritage is like all over India in a sense, because my family is like kind of like the living embodiment of that one Bollywood film, Two States. Like we're all over it, right? And there's a whole wealth of issues with that. But so we were living in Bangalore, where like my dad's family is mostly based. And then I guess the journey to St. Lucia was kind of funny, like I alluded to before, because like my dad's colleague sent his CV without him knowing to the Caribbean, because he was a Caribbean foreign like student, international student. So he sent his CV, and then, suddenly, like a year after I was born or several months after I was born, my dad received like a job offer in the mail. And he had never even heard of, like, out of nowhere. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
he didn't even know what St. Lucia was. Right. So he just was like, well, why not? Like, let's look into this. So he did. And like, there's a lot of family stories from that part of our lives where he, like our family wasn't incredibly wealthy at the time. I wouldn't say we are now either, but like at the time, they were like a newly married couple with not much money and a baby, right? So they sort of like sold belongings and scrapped together enough cash to buy one plane ticket. So he went to St. Lucia and started working. He has a story of like sleeping through a tropical storm and
Wow.
like all sorts of funny stories from that moment. But eventually my mom and I joined. We were there for, about a year or two, I think. And I was like a toddler at the time. So of course I don't really remember it much, but we have like pictures at home. And then, the similar thing happened where somehow my father was working one day and he got a phone call that some American guy wanted to talk to him. And, at this point, my dad was running like a clinic in St. Lucia, and, he was like, I'm a busy man. I don't have time for like some random American guy to like talk to me. Like, what does he want? And it turns out like this man, his name is John Fryer, and he was actually one of the pivotal figures for getting homosexuality removed from the DSM handbook, which means that like the only reason, like today, homosexuality is not seen as a mental illness by most people. But at the time it was, and this gentleman who just happened to be talking to my father was one of the pioneers of like getting that removed from the handbook of like mental disorders. So he was like a really influential, important person.
Like a psychologist, right?
Yeah, I think he was a psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist, okay.
Yeah.
I get the two always mixed up.
They're pretty similar, but yeah. So at the time, you know, like my father didn't really know this man. He was just like, whatever, some guy, some white guy wants me to work for him in Pennsylvania, wherever that is, right? And so you know, they got to talk, and then my dad decided to move us, our family, to the East Coast. And so we ended up moving to Philadelphia. And I think that's where my first like formative memories kind of like kicked in, you know, where I can remember like probably like the first month or couple months that we lived in the US. We were like brand new immigrants, and we didn't have a house or an apartment or anything, right? Like we were still learning. I mean, not me, because I was like a toddler, but my parents were still learning how to like figure out American currency and like Social Security and stuff like that, right? So we lived with that doctor, Dr. Fryer, who was my dad's like mentor, really. And he really took us under his wing. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but how did he end up like getting in touch or finding your father? Because it seems like it's a lot of like almost series of events that propelled things forward, and it just so happens that he did this outreach. Like, do you know how he ended up kind of finding your father and kind of, you know, and then you're living with him? Like that's kind of like a big change.
It was a big change. I'm not sure the exact specifics of how they got connected, but I think it was probably just that like somehow his CV got passed around. This happened a lot for my dad. I'm not really sure how, but yeah, somehow he was a talent who, you know, people had heard about, and you know, they offered him a residency so he did his residency again, even though he had already done a residency, I think in India. The immigration laws are kind of weird about transferring credentials, right? So he did his residency at Temple University, and then was starting his fellowship at University of Pennsylvania. But Dr. Fryer was like really probably the reason that my family is in the US today. And he was a really sweet man. He's passed away since, but he was really, really great guy, and really a big mentor for my father. So we were in Pennsylvania, and that's actually where my younger brother was born. We lived in Chestnut Hill, which is a cute, nice neighborhood in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. I don't know. I'm not an East Coast kid anymore, but yeah, so this was like probably Clinton era, I'm guessing. And then things kind of tightened for immigration in the US. And this was pre 9/11, but you know, like post Clinton, there was a lot more. Yeah, it was Bush Jr. And for some reason, there was some technicality, and in order to keep our visa and stay in the US, my dad, who was like in the middle of his fellowship at UPenn, he had to basically like move and start practicing in a rural, underserved area, or they would have to send us back to India, right? Which at that time was like a big complication for our family, because my younger brother was born in the US and he was a US citizen. So, we couldn't just like take him back to India easily, right? So the only choice for us in order to stay in the US was to move somewhere rural. So my dad, my mom doesn't work. She was working in India, but since immigrating, she hasn't worked. So that's why I talk about dad a lot. But yeah, so we moved to this tiny little town in Eastern Oregon in the middle of nowhere called Pendleton. It's actually a famous rodeo town, and it has a Native American reservation just outside of it. So going from like urban Philly to like rodeo town in the middle of nowhere in a state that like we didn't even know how to pronounce, right? Was a big shock for me. I was like a first grader at that time. I just started my first week of first grade, and I remember like my elementary school in Philadelphia had like a really amazing playground, and it had like the little kids playground for kindergartners, and then it had the like big kids playground for everybody else. And I had finally gotten to go to the big kids playground, and then we moved. And then there was like crappy playgrounds in my new school.
Because it was a small town, right?
Because it was a small town, and I was in like a really, really small public school that, I mean, I went to public school before that, but it was like much bigger scale, and then suddenly like, like there was like no ethnic diversity or racial diversity in my school. Suddenly it was like the sea of other little white kids and me.
Yeah, that was something I was actually going to ask you about. So I think it's a perfect time.
Yeah.
What was that like for you? I mean, I know you were still adjusting, you were still learning the language, and I have my own experiences as well from middle school when I moved to the US. But yeah, was that difficult? Was that, did you eventually make like friends? Did you meet others? I don't know, just what was your experience like there?
Yeah, I think we had probably slightly different experiences too, because I immigrated when I was really, really young.
How old were you, if you don't mind me asking?
I was like probably 3-ish.
Okay.
3 or 4. Yeah.
That's I don't know extremely young.
Yeah. And so like my first language was probably Hindi, but because I was so young when we moved, I think the first language I really learned properly was not, it was English, right? Because they put me in public school, and then I started learning how to read and write in English. I never learned how to read or write in Hindi, but like to this day, I can still like pick up on Hindi, and I can like speak some phrases, but I was sort of like robbed of that chance to like properly learn the language. So, at the time it wasn't like a barrier for me because I spoke English, and I was learning how to read and write just the same as all of my classmates. But, it was sort of like, honestly, I think that like racial awakening or whatever, it didn't really hit me until honestly like college, when I discovered what it meant to be like, like not, I guess like that's when I discovered the real meaning of like not being white or not being, Indian or whatever. Like at the time, it was always like this very surface level, oh, this is the Indian girl in a sea of white children. And I didn't really know what that meant because I never hung out with Indian people or saw other Indian people. So I just was like, okay, yeah, it's like me and my family. And that's it. But yeah, I think culturally, I learned at a very young age how to code switch. Because like when I talk to like my family, the way we talk is different. The words we use are different. Like even like sometimes my grammar changes. But when I'm with like other friends who are not Desi, then it's like an effortless switch. So I had to learn that skill at a very young age.
Gotcha. It's pretty interesting. I mean, it takes me back to my experiences, and you're right. I think we did have pretty different experiences. I did learn Hindi. I did know how to read and write it. I still can read a little bit, but yeah, I think by then I was 11 when I moved here, and I think I was pretty immersed in the Indian culture to some degree. Where I don't know. I always, growing up, you know how in Desi cultures, I'm sure, Hassan, I'd love to hear about, your perspective. If but I know you were born here, but still, if you have any thoughts on this. But like growing up, anybody who was different than Indian was like always looked at either as like, oh wow, or oh no, it was one or the other. So that was always interesting, like when I first moved here, because that's what my perception was shaped by. Coming here, it was always like that, and then I had to slowly like learn. But yeah, Hassan, what was your?
I mean, I guess for me it was a little different because I was born here. My mom was actually born in DC, but her parents are from Pakistan. My dad's from Pakistan.
Mhm.
So being born and raised here in Northern Virginia, I mean, at first there weren't like too many like Desi people. I mean, there were some, but over time, I mean, pretty quickly, it was Loudoun County is one of the fastest growing counties in the country at one point, maybe even,
It
in the
is.
top still.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's developed pretty quickly and now is very, very diverse. I mean, we had like in my high school, and I was a part of these like multicultural, clubs and stuff. And, so that was kind of always a thing. And when I would dress up for that event and people would be like, whoa, that looks so cool. And, like they'd kind of be excited to see the culture, I guess. So I kind of had like a different experience in that way, just being in this area.
And I think now I can say now Loudoun County is known to have a massive Desi community.
Oh
Like
yeah.
all the all the brown people are there. Like it's I mean there's lots of like there's I think there's some mosques in the area, there's temples, there's events happening. You've got people celebrating Holi and Eid, and it's I don't know. I know Hassan, you can talk more about your part of it, and I can speak about like our part of it. But yeah, I think it's come a long way. Anyway.
Yeah.
I feel like I've never experienced that, like honestly, from my experience. Like, I mean, okay, so what I was saying before is like after I lived in Pendleton for 5 years, and I was like maybe one of two Desi families. It was like us and like a revolving set of like one other family who kind of was there for the same reason and then left the minute they could get a green card, essentially, which kind of happened to my family. But like we moved to Salem, which is the capital city, but it's the same situation, except like instead of Native Americans, we had like Mexicans as the other diverse group, right? But like I can identify with what you're saying, Hassan, about like, like in the past it wasn't as many Desis, and then it sort of has grown, because I see that in Oregon as well. When I was a kid, we had like a Indian American Friendship Association that my parents were part of. And like a solid amount of the people who would attend the regular meetings were like white people who were either like married to someone Desi or had an interest, maybe had an exchange trip that they had done in the past and wanted to stay connected. But now that same association is like almost all brown people and people I don't even know, frankly. Like, I think it's just blossomed in a certain way because of like the rise of industries, right? Like now we have Columbia, we have Nike, all these major corporations that are attracting like fairly recent immigrants. But that was like totally not the case when I was younger.
Even tons of tech companies,
Yeah.
lots of tech talent now. I know I have a cousin, and they're here, working for a tech company. I don't want to get into any more than that, but yeah, I don't know. Anyway, yeah. So I guess moving on, that's pretty interesting. I'm glad we all shared that. What are some of your like hobbies and interests? I know I mentioned international development. I know we've talked a bit about identity and things like that, but What are some of the other things you enjoy doing?
That's so funny. That's like international development should not be my hobby. I'm trying to like make work not my hobby. But I feel that it is my hobby and it also shouldn't be. But I
mean,
feel
in a
like
way.
yeah, we're all nerds, so it's cool.
Yeah.
I think my hobby is cooking. It's always been something I've enjoyed. My family, like everybody cooks in my house. Like my dad's a great cook, my mom's a great cook, my brother and I cook. So we are like obsessed with food. We've always been obsessed with food. And we have very different food cultures, you know, within like everyone in our family. But that's something I've always carried with me. That's something that's like always been fun to like try new recipes and go to the grocery store. Going to the grocery store, especially since Peace Corps, has been like my favorite thing to do because, you know, I was in a village with like no grocery stores. So now it's like the coolest thing to walk into like a Whole Foods or whatever and like see everything on the shelves. So yeah, I've been really into Korean cooking lately. And
Nice.
yeah, just like trying new foods and yeah, new recipes, especially during the pandemic.
I was gonna say one other thing that came to mind in terms of food is, especially with people who move around a lot, you know, families, immigrants. One of the articles I remember reading like a month or two back was about, you know, how in Afghanistan there's the whole thing happening, and a bunch of people have left Afghanistan since they moved to other countries across Europe, across, you know, the U.S. The article was essentially talking about how the women, you know, who moved, who immigrated here or are refugees, the way they're finding a sense of home is through food, by sharing their food with others. But like, and this was in Albania, you know, because I served my Peace Corps service was in Albania, but there's an article about how Albanian women are trying to make a piece of their home in Albania, in a completely like different culture to them, by bringing food. And because of that, Albanians are also like, you know, getting to understand Afghani culture and food and all that. So I thought that was pretty cool. And I think food definitely connects us in that way. And I know you mentioned you moved a lot. So
Yeah.
uh, I agree. I mean, it's always, you know, at least my family is always like, oh, you know, we haven't had Indian food, or we haven't had this in a long time. I was in San Francisco last weekend and we had dosas. And I'm like, why are we having dosas? They're like,
because they're amazing.
yes, they are really good. Anyway, just a random thought. Hassan, I'll let you I'll let you go.
Yeah. So I actually you know, just speaking of hobbies and interests and that sort of thing, I kind of had a fun little question that I wanted to throw out there as well. So if you could be a Power Ranger, what color Power Ranger would you be?
Love that question. Has totally related to food, but yeah. um, I've been thinking about this for a while, but in my heart, I would love to be the Red Ranger, but in reality, I think I'm a little more introverted and I'm probably more like Billy from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. That's definitely me, like Blue Ranger all the way.
Nice. I can relate to that. I feel like the Blue Ranger in general is usually also like the tech one, the one who's kind of like just very logical and kind of brings the team together in that way, more introverted, like you said. I think definitely can relate to that for sure.
I don't know the Power Rangers all that well, but what would I be then? If both of you had to, I
feel like you would be the
I
Black
have to
Ranger, who
ask.
generally is just a bit more kind of like fun, but in tune with how other people are feeling and can kind of bring the group together in that way.
Huh.
And
I think I'm going to change my answer. I think also thinking about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the like white and gold one, that I think that's actually me, closer to me. Like the one who sort of like swoops in, like fixes all the problems and then leaves and is not heard from for a while. That's me.
That's funny.
Gotcha. Yeah, I had to ask the question just because Udin had mentioned, like, he had brought up the Power Ranger thing, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. Let me at least just bring it up. As you can clearly see, I am a fan for sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So let's see. The other thing that I wanted to, so first of all, I know you mentioned we were both in the Peace Corps, but I don't know if you mentioned where you served in the Peace Corps, and also if you've had a chance to travel elsewhere, and what has that been like? So in essence, it sounds like you've moved around in some way, shape, or form every few years in your life. But I'll let you explain.
I guess so. I didn't really think about it that way. I mean, like, I went to high school and like middle school and didn't move too much between that. But yeah, so I served in Peace Corps Armenia from 2019 to 2020 till the evacuation, similar to you with it.
Yep.
I guess, like, sorry, I already forgotten the second part of your question but like, what was it like to move around? Is that what it was?
Yeah, or just like, you were in the Peace Corps. I remember in the past when we've hung out, you mentioned that you taught abroad, English abroad. Yeah. Any travel you've done abroad, and
yeah,
okay, just curious to hear more.
I've taught abroad before Armenia, before Peace Corps. I would say the start of like my professional life was probably in English teaching, as many young people do after college. But I taught in China for a year. I was living in Shanghai, and I worked for like one of those big corporations that does like English lessons, right? And like overall, I think it was a good experience. I learned a lot about just like living abroad as an expatriate person, and made a lot of local friends. And I think that's honestly, like, living abroad is a luxury for a lot of people, but if you're lucky enough to do it, you can learn so much more about yourself and other people. And it's like very transformative. So living in China was a great experience for me to sort of get a new perspective and like remove myself a little bit from America and like look at situations from a new perspective. Not to like repeat myself, but doing that was like sort of a response to like me not getting into Peace Corps the first time I applied, actually. So I did apply to Peace Corps like right after my undergrad degree, and I didn't really have enough experience. I was being considered for like Kyrgyzstan. Yeah, you can relate.
Right there with it, yeah.
Yeah, and then I didn't get in, so I was like, what the heck? I will get an English certification. And so I got a CELTA, which is like a Cambridge University teaching English certificate. So I did that in San Francisco for a month, which was really intense. And I actually really enjoyed it. Had a great time, learned a lot about teaching, and, met a lot of international students, and then went to China. But like, since like in between those jobs, I did get to travel a lot. I traveled to Thailand, Taiwan, depending on the politics, if you consider that China or Taiwan, but I'll leave that aside. In my life, I've gotten to travel a lot, just through my parents, a couple trips to India.
That doesn't count. I'm kidding.
I know it doesn't. It really doesn't.
It totally counts.
No, it does on some trips, but on most trips, no. But I was in India. I was a fifth grader, actually, and I remember that trip especially because that's when the tsunami happened. And I was like, I had visited this place in South India that was like on the coast. It was like a famous temple complex called Mahabalipuram. And it's like ancient temples that they like discovered with like, when the sand had receded, they found this temple complex. Coincidentally, it's also next to an alligator park, like a interesting tourist attraction. But
Indiana Jones for you right there.
Yeah, really, seriously. But I was there like the week before the tsunami, and then my family and I were visiting, right? So we had actually gone up to Northeast India to visit my mom's family when the tsunami happened. But that same location, like the tsunami hit, and like all the alligators and crocodiles escaped.
Oh, wow.
So it was a wild trip, but I remember that one for sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's that is pretty interesting. Hassan, do you have, I feel like I want to give you the chance to ask.
This is really, really interesting, just hearing your background and just kind of getting to know you. I think it's a really good primer to really get into some of the big topics. So maybe we can start to jump into, really talking about like identity, and you've given your background and your experiences, but now how that can shape the Desi identity, so to speak. So just curious from your perspective of like, what does it mean to be Desi? What does it mean to like belong to this identity? Just open forum for conversation.
So that's a really good question, and something I honestly am always grappling with. Udit and I've talked a little bit about this, but I feel like I've not had a typical immigration experience in some ways, because I did not grow up in New Jersey or, New York City or Philadelphia or whatever, or Texas. And also because my parents are from two very different parts of India, like the way I was brought up was also not what you might find in most Desi circles. So for me, being Desi it's kind of like it's kind of like a constant tug of war, honestly, for me. And I know that maybe that's different for other folks who grew up in a real, Desi community that's like a strong community, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, whatever. But I don't really have that from my experience. So for me, being Desi has always sort of been like a hodgepodge of like, the few Desi people I've had in my life have been from very different parts of India or Bangladesh, Pakistan, whatever. And we've always just come together over like very simple things like shared food, language to a certain extent, because, like for Urdu and Hindi, we can sort of understand a little bit of what everyone's saying, right? And just like, like really simple things. It's almost embarrassing to say, but like Bollywood movies, music, TV shows, like that's the stuff that I turn to when I want to be closer to being Desi. But like, I think that for people who've grown up in a real strong Desi community, they probably have a very different way of seeing it, and it's much more flushed out. Because my mom is from Northeast India and is actually like from an indigenous group, like I don't really have as much of a strong connection to Hinduism or any sort of major world religion from India. And my dad is from a Hindu family, but he kind of practices Buddhism and is not like, he's kind of the black sheep of his family. So like, I've never really had that strong identity of like, this is what it means to be Desi. But yeah, I think it's always kind of like a tug of war, and like something that I'm still shaping today, even as I like meet more Desi people and kind of find commonalities.
Do you think that's been beneficial in any way though? Like, I mean, I think there's pros and cons to it, right? But the I guess the con being, you want to be a part of a community, you want to feel like you belong, that kind of thing. But I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts on, do you think that's benefited you in any way? Has that contributed to your outlook, you wanting to travel or anything? Anything?
Yeah, for sure. I think growing up, it was a negative for sure, that I was like, I mean, in a way, right? Because like growing up, I don't think I knew what it meant to be Desi. And I didn't feel the difference between me and my classmates or like people in my community as much. It was only when people pointed it out that I was different that I noticed. And that's probably just because I was a kid and didn't have the cognitive ability to understand things like race as well. But, you know, in some ways, being not in a Desi community helped me be more open, I think, to people who are different. Because I had friends who were Native American, Black, white, East Asian, whatever, right? Which I think if I had grown up in like, you know, Austin, Texas, or San Jose, or New Jersey, like in Edison or something, like I think it would have been much different. Maybe I would have had only Indian friends or only Desi friends. So I'm grateful that I had that ability to sort of branch out and meet other people without having those prejudices. But I think it's a negative because I developed prejudices about other Desi people because I constantly felt rejected by the Desi community when I did come into contact with, you know, people who grew up in places like what I mentioned. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember very strongly, like my parents would take me to like, you know, how Desi parents will like take their kids to parties because they don't want to pay for babysitting or whatever. And then they're like, okay, like all the adults are going to go talk now.
That's a new guilty.
I'm sure everyone can identify with that at least. And, you know, my parents would be like, okay, go talk to the other kids now. And I'd go in the room and I'm like, what am I supposed to say to these people? Like, I don't even know that.
And everybody's quiet, like staring at each other awkwardly.
Or they're just like busy with their Game Boys playing off in the corner, right? Which my parents didn't let me have a Game Boy. So there's that. So yeah, I just have those kinds of memories of like, number one, it's awkward because I don't know these kids. But number two, it's I could innately feel that there was something different between them and me. Mm-hmm. Even though I didn't know how to describe it. But I think that feeling is starting to go away now a little bit as I meet more people from, you know, the Indian diaspora, the Bangladeshi, Pakistani diasporas. Like, you know, it's starting to change as I like learning to trust people in our community. But, you know, it is shameful to say, but like I really, really struggled with that and felt a lot of rejection. When I was in college, actually my undergrad, I strongly remember this moment because it was so frustrating and I was so upset about it. But we had like a college club fair, and I walked up to the like Indian American or Desi American club booth, and I was like, "Hi, I'd like to sign up. Like, do you have like the list or whatever?" And the guy just looked at me and he was like, "Oh yeah, that like." Please do, like, you don't have to be Indian to join. And I was like, oh, no, I am Indian. And he was like, oh, what's your other half? And I just felt so like upset by that and so like hurt, especially because like I am first generation Indian, technically. Mm-hmm. You know, you don't hear it in my accent, you don't really see it, but like I always tell people I'm 1.5 generation because that's how I feel. But like I've probably been in India or like I was born there versus like the guy who was signing up people for the club was probably like second gen, you know? So like I felt really insulted, but that's a perfect example of how I've always felt in our community. But I think that it's changing now. And I've met great people like the two of you, you know, other folks at Brandeis and like, you know, people in this community in the DC area who don't really care, honestly, where you're from, but are like happy to find out that you have some sort of commonality. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting because I feel like also part of like a lot of Desi people's, you know, stories is really that clash of identities in a way, especially for Desi Americans, because, you know, just there's different levels of it, right? Like from your experience, you know, Uda's experience, my experience, like there's even just being in America and being Desi, like it is, you know, there are different cultures, and America is a mix of so many different, you know, cultures as well too. And so just like how folks have to navigate and handle that and find their own self identity is challenging too. It's like, it's just trying to like fit in, but finding the right group to belong with, but maybe there isn't one, you know. It's I feel like that's something that a lot of Desi people try and navigate.
And it's also like, I've noticed it's super cliquey. I don't know about for like the Pakistani diaspora, but like
it is, yeah.
For India, it's so cliquey. Like all the Gujarati people hang out together, all the Punjabi people hang out together, and like it was really weird for me too, because, you know, not to like pick on the Northern Indians, but like there's a lot more, it feels like, at least in the past, there was a lot more immigration from North India. And so as someone who has like no ties to North India, really, like, you know, my dad's from the South, my mom's from the Northeast, which is very different. Like I would go into Indian circles and like, I didn't know any of the foods. Like, I don't know how to do, what is it? Garba? With it? Like,
with the sticks. Yeah.
Yeah,
oh, it's so colorful and fun though.
Yeah. It looks like a blast and I want to try it, but I felt so awkward in college because like everyone's like, okay, we're going to do Garba now. And I'm like, how? Like, I don't know how to do this. Like me and my dosas, like this is all I know. So, you know, like it's not just like India versus Pakistan versus Bangladesh. It's also like, are you like Sindhi? Are you, you know, Tamil? Are you whatever, you know? And then it's like, you know, there's always other things too, like religion and stuff like that, language, whatever. But it's so hard to make a community when everybody has such diversity, which is a strength, but like, it's also hard for some people to overcome those like compartmentalized ideas about people.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people don't realize that maybe aren't Desi. They just see, oh, brown people, you all have the same tradition. You know, like somebody, like I was telling people about my wedding, they're like, oh, I went to an Indian wedding once and they did all this and this. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. We don't do any of that stuff. You know, like it's totally different. And they don't always get that, you know, that it is so diverse.
I remember actually, Hassan, I remember coming to your wedding and I learned quite a few things. I'd never, you know, I don't think I'd truly been to like a full Pakistani wedding before. So there were all sorts of things that I was like, okay, this is cool, you know, like this is neat. And you're right. You know, maybe some of the clothes might look similar, but you know, beyond that, the traditions, the customs and everything, it was eye-opening. It was enlightening. It was really cool. So the other thing I did want to mention very quickly, Methi, unlike you, I was like on the flip side. So I always grew up in the Desi community, and I was also always being put in the box of like, okay, go be cliquey. And I was, you know, when I moved to the States, I always wanted to be, for some reason in my head, you know, probably part of it was like, you know, the tough experiences I had because I moved here as a middle schooler and I was trying to get accepted into America. So for me, my life has been all about running away from my Indian identity. It had been when I was growing up. Whereas now I'm much more comfortable about who I've become and, you know, how much meaning our traditions, our culture, you know, just Desi culture in general has. And I'm more about the in-depth stuff. You know, a lot of people just say, okay, yeah, we do this, we do that, but they don't understand the meaning of why we do it. I enjoy learning about that now. And I feel like I am more connected with my roots in that way. And one last thing I'll say is, you know, after I moved to the States, I was always constantly looking to make friends with other people outside of the Desi community because I always wanted to be accepted. But, you know, as I got to college and, you know, learned more about who I am, what it means to be me and part of my culture and everything, I think I embraced that. And actually, Hassan, you've helped me a lot with that as well. So thank you again. I know I've said things many times, but yeah, you've I don't know, just you've always been accepting of, I know we're from two different countries within the Desi diaspora, but, I've always felt accepted and connected, and yeah, so it's really helped.
Yeah, same, man. I think that's kind of what also led to this podcast and the naming of it, of just kind of celebrating both of us, both the differences, the similarities, and just kind of, sharing that as well.
Yeah.
Which has been cool.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, Methi. I want to put the spotlight back on you now.
No, you're fine. Love it.
Yeah. Just, it's good to relate in that sense. But so I know we touched on this maybe a little bit, but what do you think people think of when they think of an Indian or Pakistani person? And just, I'd love to get into that. And also, if you want to get into Desi cuisines and what people think, assume Indian people eat, the expectations versus reality, the traditions and customs, expectations versus reality, it would be great to chat about that a bit.
Sure. Oh man, there's a lot there. So I can't speak about what it's like to be Pakistani. Maybe Hassan can do that. But in terms of what it's like to be Indian, they think of Priyanka Chopra. They think of I don't know, what's that one movie? God, that one awful movie that everyone watched about not Life is Pi. Well, that one too, but
Slumdog Millionaire?
Slumdog Millionaire. Everyone thinks everyone looks like they're from Slumdog Millionaire, right? You're poor, you're brown, you're from Delhi. I don't know.
I mean, I personally love that movie, but I see what you mean though. So.
But when they think of India and especially I can't speak to what it's like to be, stereotyped about as a Indian man, but as an Indian woman, I can say that they don't expect someone with my phenotype necessarily. And they definitely expect you to be I don't know, doing the weird head thing, or you know what I'm talking about? Or just people expect you to only wear a sari all the time, or I don't even know. They don't expect someone like me who's got, cropped short hair and tattoos and I don't know, piercings or things like that. So it's always these boxes of nice, sweet Indian woman who works as a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, or I don't know, Desi auntie on the street who awkwardly wears her sari everywhere, even when it's not normal. So yeah, I think that's the two views that people have of what it means to be at least an Indian woman, when it's only very recently that I've found people in the media that are Indian who seem like normal people. What was it? There's a cooking show with a Desi woman who I think is Nadia Bakes, right? And then there's now there's comedians that are Desi, and I think that's really cool to see people who are just average people who have careers and aren't a stereotype from Bollywood.
I also heard that there was some talk in the government about recognizing some of the Desi holidays, whether it be Eid or Diwali and stuff like that. I don't know how far it's gonna get, but I've heard speculation about that. So that's interesting as well.
I think there's certain counties in the country and stuff that have that have done that, but I think it varies based on location.
Gotcha.
Down in the South, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon, but there are some places that are recognizing some of those holidays, which, makes sense if a lot of the community is represented from those cultures. I think that's kind of cool to see.
Yeah.
Hassan, what do you so can you speak a little bit from the Pakistani side? Just what are your thoughts? Can you relate with what Methi is saying, or what are your perceptions? What are your views on that?
Yeah, I was thinking through that. I don't know. I mean, I having grown up here and like I feel sometimes a little bit of an outsider in like Pakistan. Like I've only been to Pakistan once when I was little. And most of my families has since pretty much all moved over here. So I don't really have any reason to necessarily, go back at this point. So, I mean, it's like, you have certain stereotypes that come up, especially after 9/11 and that sort of thing. But otherwise, I don't know if I, can really relate to or identify like what folks stereotype me as. I feel like for the most part, I felt pretty accepted. I think sometimes the stereotypes come when like, if I talk about the fact that, our culture, there's a lot of arranged marriages, right? And so a lot of people, their perception of what that means and, oh, wait, did you even get to like meet the person beforehand? Were you forced into it? It's like, it's not like that, it's like, it's getting folks to understand because they don't, where things differ from the traditional, American culture. I think that's where sometimes there's some extra conversations to be had to really explain what it truly means and the reason behind it. So I think those are some of the interesting conversations that I've
and just to add on to that, I've actually given that the whole arranged marriage thing a bit of thought. So me personally, can't speak for anyone else, but I came to the conclusion that all marriages are arranged in some way, shape, or form. Whether they're arranged by Match.com, Hinge, your parents, your friends, there is an arrangement happening. In some cases, I don't know, maybe they're chance or something, but most marriages in some way are arranged if you look at the big picture. But I think because of maybe the media stereotypes, I don't know what it is, where everything, this idea of like arranged marriages comes from. The view has somehow become that it's something that's enforced in a way, but I think in some cases it may be, but certainly in many cases also, that I've encountered, it isn't.
Sorry to interrupt with it, but I was going to say also, like, I feel like arranged marriages, kind of going off what you said, Hassan, like they get a really bad rep, but like it's honestly a great mode to like make sure that you have family cohesion and like that your spouse's family and your family get along. Like, isn't that what most people want in a marriage, right? To have like a happy, larger, extended family. If that works for people, then why not?
And I think that's great where, point. When it comes to sometimes like the Desi identity, part of it is some of the core values that I feel like are pretty present. And I feel like there's certain elements of that like, how families tend to be a lot more like involved in everything, and everything is kind of like, traditionally, you'll have multiple generations of folks, together. And so I think that's very different sometimes from the traditional, American culture, so to speak. And so I think that's also some of the discrepancies. Folks don't understand the whole background or the context behind it. But yeah, to your point, I mean, it's if you really take a step back and think about it, it makes sense.
And just projecting here, but I feel like maybe American culture might like mainstream American culture might like swerve back to that model eventually in the future, because like, especially now you think about it in the pandemic, like people are living with their parents, people are like reaching out for their social support networks. And if, let's say you got married and you were just living with your spouse and something happened to your spouse, heaven forbid, like you would just be alone. But if you have an extended family, it makes more sense in like this crazy world that we live in, right? So even if you aren't like, in a Desi, right? Like you could still benefit from that model of having like just close relationships between your family and your spouse's family.
And people probably have had an arranged marriage and didn't really realize that in the technical term of, oh wait, yeah, my parents also kind of there's sometimes it's just what it is. Yeah.
So interesting. Yeah. All right. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to ask maybe a couple other quick questions. And we're already talking about this, but is there anything else that you want to add on to like what does family mean in the Desi culture? Because I mean, the arranged marriage thing, we, kind of like talked about the family model and all that a little bit, but if you want to add anything else, what does family mean in the Desi culture, or what have your experiences and perspectives kind of been?
I would say that like no matter what mode or model of family or marriage or otherwise that you've had, like Desi families that I've encountered, they tend to be very like they really focus on cohesion, for better or for worse. It's really about like
that's true,
maintaining harmony within the generations. But there, in my experience, there's definitely a little bit more of a power structure with like the older generations, right? The elders get, they've lived longer, so they have more experience, and maybe rightfully so, they have a little bit more power in our families. And I think that's true even in like non-Desi families to a certain degree. But from my experience, that's definitely the case. But, I think family is something where like for brown folks, like we really care a lot about it. I know we don't have a lot of time to go into it, but like my parents had a love marriage, and it's obviously very different than arranged marriage, but that dynamic of like family cohesion and care about family is still it's still important to our family, even if it's a different type of like way that they got together. Because, like, especially as immigrants, like we still send money back to India. We still, think about our family members. We still call them on the phone or whatever. So even from afar, those values are still there.
The bonds are like strong, right?
Yeah.
I feel that way with my, like, weirdly, I feel that way with my Albanian host family too. So it's kind of nice. I like that personally. The older I get, the more I'm like, yeah, that, there's a value to that for me, personally, though. Yeah. I didn't value that when I was younger. So, Hassan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. And just for background as well, like Methi. So I am living with my parents, my wife. I have a 15-month-old son. My sister's with us as well. And so
his son's adorable, by the way.
Nice.
Sorry.
But and my grandmother used to live with us, but then she passed away a few years ago. But so I mean, I've just been a part of kind of that multi-generational household as well, and definitely like that's always been a big factor of like just family having that support structure, that sort of thing. Now I do feel like also, I mean, it's like with anything, there's pros and cons to all of it, right? I mean, it's family, I feel like, is such a central and core piece of the Desi identity in a good way, but also sometimes in a can be a challenging way, can be something that is interesting to navigate as well. And but I think it's either way, it's definitely a core part of the Desi culture.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So also just to do a time check, how Methi, how good are you on time? Do we want to okay, you're good. Cool. Let's see. So Udit, do we want to in terms of our list of topics, is there one that we want to kind of pivot to and focus on, or do we just go through the?
Yeah, let me there are like, if we I know there's a lot more to talk about,
and if you're up for it, I mean, this is this podcast, like we'd love to really have folks come on periodically and really delve into different things as well too. So we hope this was a good experience, and we don't want this to be the end of it. If you are interested in
yeah, this was a lot of fun
down the road as well.
So yeah, let's see. I'll probably, if we can touch on like one or two more quick topics, and then we can wrap it up after that, if that's okay. One thing I do want to ask, Methi, I know in the past we've talked about space and what that means, setting boundaries and our cultural backgrounds and what that means, respect. Let's talk about that a little bit before we wrap up.
Sure. Yeah. So the context for that discussion was my family and I, so my parents and I are actually estranged from one another, which is kind of a big deal to admit to in our community. But I think space has become something very important for maintaining relationships and also for healing. And I know that sounds strange coming from someone who just said that they're estranged from their parents, but it takes space to process feelings sometimes, and to give yourself time to like reflect and maintain a safe space so that you can like set up boundaries and think about things. So for me, in my experience, I found space to be very beneficial for helping me like process the issues that I've had with my family. And obviously no family is perfect. We all have challenges. And sometimes that space is like putting yourself in your room and closing the door and just like breathing for 5 minutes, right? But then sometimes that space is like, I need years of separation or geographic separation. And I think that in our community, we don't give ourselves that space, especially young people. We're trying so hard to survive, but also like make our parents proud, our grandparents proud. And that's a lot of pressure. When our parents are elders, they just want us to be happy at the end of the day, and they do have their own expectations, but sometimes both sides need a little space to be able to understand the other without having those internal pressures and the environmental pressures. So I feel like it's something that I would hope that more young people, especially in our Desi community, will talk about and, recognize that there's no shame in needing a little space from your family. It doesn't mean that you've given up your core Desi values or morals, right? Like I still really love my family. I still value my culture and my family, but sometimes I need a little space. And in hindsight, like I think that being estranged from my parents and like speaking openly about it has helped me understand them better and kind of give them a little more empathy. And so when I'm eventually ready to like talk to them again, I'll be at a place where I can meet them halfway, and it'll be a lot more healthy than just like putting up with all the feelings that I've bottled up, so yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that as well. I think, like you said, it is something you don't always hear about necessarily in the Desi community, but I think what you've said is something that is important to recognize. And I think it also just ties into in general, like the mental health and mental well-being of people sometimes can suffer in those scenarios. And that is something that is also not traditionally addressed in the Desi community. And so I don't know if you want to, talk at all about like, your perceptions or like that sort of the almost the taboo on mental health and what that means.
So mental health is something that has been like a real core part of my identity in a way, because my Udit and I have talked about this too, but my dad's a psychiatrist. So it's funny because I've always grown up hearing about mental health and about like, what can happen if you don't take care of your mental health. But at the same time, we're all human. We all carry our own baggage, whether that be mental disorders or just like environment, our family, culture, everything, right? And I feel like I grew up with this like textbook knowledge about mental health and like this idea of like, oh yeah, there's these chemical imbalances in our brain and it like makes us do these things. But that cultural aspect of stigma has always been there. Because like, even though my father is like very educated about mental health and like is a practitioner of like medicine, he still has his cultural baggage as a Desi man. And in our community, we don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about like mental illness. We don't talk about, things like that. But it's been such a big part of my life. My grandmother was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and I've had like family members, like not like close family members, but family members like disappear or like have like real bad mental health issues. And in my like immediate family, my parents and I, like we've talked about it, and it's more of like almost like a warning thing, like if you don't take care of yourself and you don't take your medicine or you don't do this, like you will end up like this person. So I grew up feeling afraid of these mental disorders or of these like issues. I saw them as like a problem. And I think that's reinforced in like American culture, but especially in our culture. And there's never been like it's only recently now that young Desi people are talking about mental health and like taking care of ourselves, right? But growing up, it was always like, you don't want to end up like this crazy uncle here who like did blah, 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 right? Like it's like a taboo still. So I feel like that's something that's going to slowly change as like younger generations than even ourselves in this call are starting to talk about it and are like, becoming more comfortable with recognizing that just because you have ADHD or depression or whatever, like doesn't mean you're a bad person or a failure. It just is like a way that you are, right? Kind of rambling, but
that makes sense.
I'm actually, no, it's okay. Just one quick thought that I had is I don't know what either of you think, but I'd love to see if you agree with this. But I feel like how these mental health issues sometimes may develop are maybe because of social pressures to some degree. I don't know. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on that? And because my perception has been that there are a ton of social pressures of being this or doing that or doing this way or whatever. And sometimes people, like we've said multiple times, people don't necessarily fit neatly into these boxes, and they're struggling with their identity. They're struggling with who they are, and whether the way they feel is right or wrong. I don't know, just thoughts on any thoughts.
Sometimes it's not even like you're saying, it's societal pressure, but I think it's also even bigger than that. It's like environmental, right? Like you think about the like farmer suicides in India. It's an economic thing that has made people go to the point of desperation, right? Same thing happens in the US to people, right? If you don't feel supported and you don't have like social services to take care of you when, things go south, then you're going to resort to, negative means, I guess. And so I think a lot of mental illness, I mean, some of it is genetic, some of it is like things that are beyond our control, but some of it is also stress related, and we live in a very stressful world. So I think that's a huge part of it. And, our culture is very like work ethic, like we're going to work super hard. We're going to achieve good grades and like be the best that we can be. And that was like the mantra growing up for me. It was like, always do like 110%. And frankly, it's super toxic to think about it that way. Like we have to learn to relax as a community.
Yeah, there's
Take
such
a
high
deep breath.
expectations that are like placed on. I mean, in some ways, it does come from that sort of immigrant mindset of I had to build everything and we had to work hard for it, and look at you, it's just handed to you, is kind of the perception that sometimes the older generation does have as well. And just culturally, there's certain, I don't know, like traditional expectations or mindsets, like as a Pakistani man, I'm supposed to be like the strong, tough guy that's gonna like take care of the family and stuff. And if I get upset, I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes I will like cry or something, right? And that like is seen as a weakness traditionally. And if I did that in front of like the larger Desi community, they'd be looking at me and talking about me like, what's this dude crying about? Like what, like it's that perception that and then of course that causes folks to repress their feelings more, and then they deal with it internally. And sometimes it's
That's
I think
so
the pressures
interesting.
and like
yeah, I feel for like Desi men. I think there's a lot of pressure on everyone, but there's a lot of pressure on young men to be a certain way, and there's like, of course there's like privileges that are afforded to men versus women, but like at a certain expense too, because you're expected to be like the tough guy, the patriarch, whatever, right? So there's definitely a flip side to that.
Yeah. So how are we doing on time now? Are we good? Hassan, do you have any other questions you want to squeeze in, or?
So I guess as far as maybe to kind of wrap up like this episode, and again, we'd love to kind of really delve. There's so much to talk about in here and so many different ways to get into it. But since we're really talking about Desi identity and the community at large, I am curious of, we do like to throw in these like what if questions.
Love that.
And in this case, we thought it'd be interesting of just, what if you had the opportunity to speak to the Desi community at large, or kind of really send a message out to the Desi community at large? What would it be? Like, what would you say and why?
I would remind our community that, I mean, it sounds really cheesy and corny, but like really that we're stronger together. And by together, I don't just mean like Indian people for India, Pakistani people for Pakistan. No, like if we just learn to cast aside our boxes and our differences, like the collective power of our community is so great. Like we are a very substantial minority group in the US and in Europe as well. Like the collective power that we could have in our countries is great. And it's something that if we could just learn to like cooperate and cast aside those little minutia differences within our communities and sub-communities, like, we could make great social change.
That's
pretty powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. I couldn't help but think you were like channeling like the inner Power Ranger there, like together we are more, like yeah. the whole,
I love that. I told you, white and gold Power Ranger swoops in and then leaves.
There you go. But I think that's definitely a great message for the community out there. Udit, I don't know if you had anything else to add, or if not, we can quickly pop in the chat and just give a shout out as well.
Yeah, let's do that. And I was typing a bit in the chat and asking if anybody has any questions. So while you go through that, if anybody watching has any questions for Methi, please feel free to type them, hopefully quickly, so we can wrap up. But go ahead, Hassan.
Yeah, absolutely. So just shout out to Joel, who popped in the chat and said hello. And also shout out to Munib as well. Munib said, life for me in elementary school was like, everybody hates Chris, LOL. So he's feeling some of the conversation that was happening earlier as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you to everybody that did post anything. And if nobody gets to the chat questions, I mean, you can definitely comment later as well with anything, and we could certainly follow up on that.
That's right. Okay, and with that, Methi, do you have any final words before we wrap up?
Just thank you so much for inviting me, and it was really awesome to, speak to more folks in our community and to hear your perspectives, because even though we all have very different backgrounds, we all had a lot of commonalities as well, and it was really fun.
This was a cool conversation. I enjoyed it as well. So thank you, Methi, for joining us and for an intriguing conversation. Is there any way that people can get in touch with you? Is there anything that you would like to say? I don't know if you have any, maybe email or LinkedIn or anything. If you want people to connect with you in any way,
yeah,
please go ahead.
For sure, you can. My name is on the little Zoom box.
Right.
You can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook. Either of those are totally fine, and I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. It was great meeting you as well. So appreciate you joining us. And thank you again to everybody that joined us in the chat. Please share your thoughts with us via any comments on social media. We are on Twitter at the Dose of Desi, and you can email us at thedoseofdesipod@gmail.com.
That's right. And keep an eye on the social media for any polls or episode notifications as well. And if you also have any feedback or ideas that you'd like to share with us, we're all open to that. So with that, thank you for another great episode to both of you, Hassan and Methi. Take care, and we will see you next time.
Bye.